Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard. Learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude. Welcome. Today, I am speaking with Mitch Matthews, who is a success coach, a speaker, and a creator of the top 1% podcast, Dream, Think, Do, where he helps high-achieving leaders and entrepreneurs dream bigger, think better, and do more of what they were put on the planet to do. Mitch has worked with organizations like Nike, NASA, and Disney, and he's the creator of the Authority Bridge, a proven process that helps professionals turn their experience into a coaching and speaking business that they love. Welcome, Mitch. Thanks for joining us today.
Amanda, I love it. I've been so looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for having me on.
Me too, and as two people who are busy doing what they were put here to do, and as people who live on an earth that has things that happen,
Right?
we have not talked in a really long time. We've had to kind of reschedule things. And so I'm super excited as I looked back over a little bit of my notes from our pre-recording call. I'm excited to see what God wants to share through what you're doing today.
I love it.
Yeah, me too. It's always such a fun experience because I know everyone who's listening, but if you don't normally listen and you're new to the podcast, welcome. But everyone that's used to listening knows that we always pray before we start. And so we turn things over to God. This is really his time. And for us, it's just as fun as it is for you because we don't really know what we're going to talk about. And
Exactly.
it makes it a little more exciting. Now, I like to do things a little differently, and I want to get to all the great things that you're doing right now. But I love to start at the beginning because I think really it's so important. I have a lot of people who listen who do not read the Bible or they don't go to church, but they listen because our stories are so interesting. They can tell that we already know each other and that this is for real, that we're not just asking 3 questions and moving on.
Yeah.
And so they get fully invested. And one of the things that I've heard from people is by starting in our childhood and working up to what we're doing now, it creates this beautiful platform for God, for his character to be shown, right? That every story is unique and different, but God is always the same. And so it's given me such a beautiful side ministry of being able to talk to people who didn't even know they were seeking, and yet they started seeing who God was and had questions. And so as someone who kind of had a Damascus road, coming to Christ of my own, I'm going to be 62 years old in May, and it'll be 25 years in Christ in May. So do the math. I spent way, way more time not in Christ. And so I absolutely love having those conversations or talking to people who maybe have never even considered God before. So can't wait,
I love it.
can't wait to see how your story unfolds. So with all of that in mind, Mitch, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your childhood?
Absolutely. So I grew up in a small town in Iowa, and the town itself kind of looks like one of those towns you find in a Hallmark Christmas movie. The courthouse in the town square, the city was built basically and organized by a bunch of engineers because Maytag, the company, was based there, and Maytag had a huge influence on the town, and so the town was just perfectly ordered, and the streets were straight, and all of those things, and it was just a great, great small town to grow up in, and loved it. Worked real hard. I wound up. There was a bike shop 2 blocks off of that square, in a little hole in the wall building, and it was next to the Goodwill and around the corner from a strip club. So it was the one strip club in town. So that's pretty much where I spent my youth. I pretty much stalked the bike shop owner early on,
Hmm.
and long enough to either have me arrested for loitering or to hire me. And he and his wife decided to hire me. And so that's where I spent a lot of time growing up.
Yeah, well, you just threw me off there because I was about to say, oh, it sounds like one of those like Hallmark, it's time for the candy cane Christmas dinner extravaganza,
Exactly. It was really
but
Santa that owned the tree farm. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. But I guess every town has
Every
its
town.
it's interesting places. Now,
Right.
you had told me something during our pre-recording call that I
Yeah,
didn't want to skip over because it did really affect you. It's funny how the little things when we go back and recount.
absolutely.
Maybe we don't even really think about in the moment how big of an effect they might have, but they really do. So you had a milk allergy.
Yeah.
And you told me that it affected you and you had to kind of be on your own at school. You had to be really careful. I
Yeah.
think allergies are way more kind of commonplace now and
Yeah, they're
prevalent.
more understood now, but at
Yeah.
that time I was just a kind of a scared, unhealthy kid a lot of my
Yeah.
childhood. And like you said, and I'm grateful for it that allergies are much more understood.
Yeah.
But at that time, really didn't understand. And it really confounded the doctors. Of course, my mom is really the one who figured it out. Interestingly enough, when they were trying to isolate, what in fact was causing all my health problems,
Hmm.
one of the medications tasted terrible. So the
Yeah.
doctor suggested I should have a big bowl of ice cream with it every
Oh
time I took
no.
it. Exactly. And so my mom started to figure out by the
Yeah.
process of elimination, maybe it's this
Yeah.
milk allergy thing. And,
Wow.
I grew up drinking baby formula, which sounds terrible, but that was how
Yeah.
you got soy milk back then. And
Yeah.
it really was one of those things where my mom either had to pack my lunch or the school would have this very special lunch, or if I went to summer camp, there was one summer camp in particular where they had me sit at my own table by myself because they didn't really want my food to get contaminated. They didn't
Yeah.
understand either. And they had the best of intentions, but that led to some, it was very easy for me to be a worried, scared
Yeah.
kid. Yep.
Yeah, and that's why these things that we think are so little really are valuable,
Yeah.
because immediately what I wrote down, and I sit here and write little things and little notes on the side of the page, like, how do you think that affected your relationships when you were young? And did that make you personally afraid when you didn't know what it was? And the last thing is, how cool that you saw this example of a mom who advocated for you.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. So yes to all those things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It did, it was that. And I have always been prone to worry.
Mm,
I am a very creative person, and through
yeah.
God's grace, I figured out a job and a career where I could
Hmm.
use that to my advantage, which is absolutely beautiful. But I talk to people about worry all the time
Yeah.
because highly creative people often find it easy to worry because that creativity put to good use can help me build a business. That creativity put to negative use, I can imagine horrible things happening in
Right.
seconds, right? Like I'm kind of my brain can be the Tesla of worrying. Like I can be,
Hmm.
fine to freaked out in 2.3 seconds, right? Because my brain is
Yeah.
wildly creative. And, somebody once suggested growing up, you know what? If you worry, just ask
Hmm.
yourself, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? And then
Hmm.
move forward. And I'm like, oh no, I can come up with a million possible
Yeah.
answers to that question. So that's not a good solution for me. So it
Yeah.
absolutely, being basically the allergy would also make me miss school. And so
Hmm.
when I was home, of course, while I was missing school, most kids would be like, woohoo, I'm out of school. But for me, it was
Yeah.
like, oh, my friends are going to think, forget about me. I'm going to miss that test. I'm going to fall
Hmm.
behind. And so
Hmm.
oftentimes the things in some ways that made me worry were even worse when I was more in isolation and things like that. So I did have to figure out ways to handle that. And sadly, I didn't necessarily early on get better at handling it. I got better at hiding it. And so I looked like I was fine on the outside, but there were big parts of my heart that were dying.
Yeah.
And I can say that, early on, and I think we talked about this in our last conversation, that
Hmm.
a youth pastor of a different church, not the church I grew up in. I grew up in a great church, wonderful church, but I happened to go to an event at a different church, and they had a really active, vibrant youth ministry. And this pastor saw me there. I was actually invited because my brother's band, Christian rock band, was playing. And he noticed me and he was like, "Hey, come and meet with me at my office at 3 o'clock on Wednesday." And I'm like, "Why? I don't go to your church. I don't know who you are, all this stuff." And he's like, "Just do it." And
Yeah.
and so I was just curious. I'm like, "What's
Yeah.
this guy about?" And I remember I rode my Schwinn Tornado bicycle up to meet with him. And he just sat me down, and this guy was cool. He was an older guy, but he had pictures of like him with movie stars and cowboys and all this stuff on his wall. And I'm like, "Who is this guy? What's going on?" And he just basically started to talk with me about the Bible, but he did
Mm.
something really unique in that he actually also asked me questions and
You
helped
know,
me discover a lot
yeah.
of what God had for me in the Bible and
Hmm.
in a relationship with him. And his name was Stan Weirson, and I'm wildly grateful for that because
Yeah.
those conversations made a big difference in my life.
Well, one of the questions I ask a lot when I'm having a pre-recording phone call with people is many times people will skip over chunks of time or skip over things that are really important because we only have so much room in our brain to remember
Sure.
everything.
Yeah.
And one of the things is I ask people, like, in addition to your family, like, what about grandparents? What about aunts and uncles? What about friends, parents? What about special people? Because God does pepper these people in, and it's
Oh,
on
yeah.
purpose. And it's wonderful. I just want to put a pin right there in that he asked you questions because the notes that I made when you were talking about creativity and worry, and I love that you put them together because they are the opposite sides of the same coin. The
100%.
same thing that allows us to create, and we're made in God's image to be creators, right? We all
Yep.
have something to make, right? And
Yep.
we all have this ability to leave our marks on the world, and from the way that we've been created, we can be creators. Yet when we don't have this full surrender, when we don't have an absolute trust in anything, and it should be in God, but when we don't have that yet, it becomes worry. And so it's wonderful to see that you've been able to embrace your creativity and use the things God's given you now in your life. But this gentleman, he did exactly the right thing. When
Yep.
we ask people questions and we bring them into conversation and we create community, that is when we best can actually open up and be open not only to another person's perspective, but to God's perspective on what we're doing.
Yep. It's so true. And it's interesting. I grew up, my parents are amazing. They're true encouragers. They,
Hmm.
created safe spaces for me, all those things. But in addition to that, to your point, you need to have other influences as well. And Stan was one of
Yes.
those. And when I look back, I wouldn't have been able to put my finger on exactly what he was doing, but one of the things that he
Yes.
was doing was holding me as capable.
Hmm.
I think back, Stan never tried to convince me of
Hmm.
anything. He helped me to uncover God's truth. Right. I think
That's right.
sometimes we're so tempted to try to
Hmm.
convince everybody of how awesome God is.
That's right.
And let me give you the 17 reasons why you should think so too.
Right,
And
right.
and I do. I think God is amazing. Jesus is incredible. Holy Spirit is so generous. I love them. They guide me. They've been so good to me.
Yeah.
But boy, if all I go in is teaching and preaching mode in a one-on-one relationship, oftentimes people put their walls up just because they
That's
can't
right.
take all of that information or that all that enthusiasm. And so sometimes we have to trust God to be as
Hmm.
big as he is. And that's exactly what Stan did. Stan
Yeah.
would have me read a verse. He was a big fan, of course, of the Gospels, and he would just have me read a story about something God or that Jesus did specifically from the Gospels. And it's funny because, I probably heard a lot of them, using flannel graphs growing up, Bible stories, all that
Right.
stuff. but he would say, "Hey, what do you think?" He was using Socratic method. I didn't know it at the time, but he
Yes.
was using
Yes.
Socratic method of like, "Hey, what do you think people would have thought when
Mm-hmm.
Jesus did that?"
Yeah.
Or like Jesus spit and made
Yeah.
mud and put that on his eyes. What do you think that was like to be next to? And I'd be
I
like,
so want
what?
to meet
Wait,
him.
what? Like,
Yeah.
what? Like,
Yeah.
are you kidding? And then
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time we were talking about, I'm like, that kind of sounds like something that'd be in a movie, right? Like, I don't
Yeah.
even know how you do something like that with special effects, and this was
Mm-hmm.
back in the, mid 80s for crying out
Mm-hmm.
loud, the Star Wars was, the biggest
Right.
thing. And we were just talking about how some of these things that God pulled off, like they would have had a hard time creating them in movies for crying out loud. They were that big.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I just remember that, again, Stan took his time. He was patient. And he drew that out of me. And it says in Hebrews that God's truth is written on our hearts. And
That's right.
Dan seemed to just recognize that and just trust that
Mm-hmm.
God would reveal the things that I needed in
Yeah.
that moment. And I will say, like, I'm a success coach now, and I'm a speaker and a trainer, as you mentioned, and I
Mm-hmm.
help people. Like, I'm a big believer in psychology and
Mm-hmm.
understanding neuroscience. And it's funny because I do think that science and God and science and scripture don't, like, they're not opposites. I think science is just finally, in some ways, we're catching up and figuring out some of the ways that God has done things. So I don't think that those fight at all. And
They
I
don't.
and I
Yeah.
coach people all
God
the time.
created science.
Exactly
Correct. Yeah.
right. So I coach
Exactly.
people all the time on different specific strategies they can
Mm-hmm.
use to worry less and focus more and
Mm-hmm.
prioritize all of those things, right? But what I love about what Stan did was he just, again, trusted that the heart of God would reveal itself at the times where I needed it. And
Mm-hmm.
he, again, he didn't try to uh give me a ton of instruction. He let God's revelation reveal itself in God's perfect timing.
Absolutely. Stan
And that
did
was
two
huge.
things. He did two things. Number one, he trusted in the fact that God's word will not come back void without
Right.
accomplishing what he sends it to do. And number two, Stan was Jesus, right? He was intentional. He asked questions. What did Jesus do when he met the woman at the well?
Right.
Right? He was
Exactly.
intimate. There was no one around. He wasn't even supposed to be talking to her, but he did, and he asked her questions which opened her up to being able to see who he was and to be able to hear the truth and to be able to see what she was lacking and share it with someone. And the same woman who was getting the water in the hot noonday sun so she could
Right.
avoid all the other ladies who talked about her, dropped her bucket and ran to go
Right.
evangelize and tell everyone
Yeah.
about Jesus. And so this is what Stan was doing. He was intentional with you. He asked you questions. He did it in an intimate, quiet setting so that you could begin to open up to the reality of who God was. So
Yep. No
kudos to
doubt.
Stan.
Yep,
Awesome.
exactly. Well,
And
it's
what's
interesting just not, but years later, Stan passed away, and I was able to attend his funeral. And I would say it was a packed
mm,
house. They had to have overflow seating. But
yeah.
I think there were probably no less than 100 pastors in the room
Wow.
who were pastors because of
Of Stan.
Stan's
Wow.
mentorship and help and all of that. So it's amazing, it was truly a taste of heaven to get
Mm-hmm.
to see the ripple effect of just one person.
Amen. And it's so important for anyone listening and to remind ourselves when you pour into other people, right? It is important. We don't just keep the things we learned for ourselves. We are created for community. We are supposed to be in one family, and
Yep.
we are supposed to be sharing the overflow of what we receive.
Yep. So
Yeah.
true.
So
Love it.
important. So, you had told me that you didn't think that you excelled in what you called, quote unquote, I'm quoting air quotes over here, normal things.
Sure.
But you thought like you were really good at, for example, you told us about the bike shop you worked in, selling bikes.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, like, how did you apply what you found you were good at into other areas of your life?
Yeah, and that's what I love is, and I think that's I appreciate so much about your podcast is, God's in the details,
Mm-hmm.
right? And early on, I didn't necessarily understand that God was with me
Yeah.
wherever I went, right? But one of my absolute favorite verses is from Psalm 23, and
Mm-hmm.
David eventually became somebody who truly knew the heart of God.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, how flawed David was, but at the same time, he just had this understanding. And I
Mm-hmm.
love specifically, Psalm 23. It talks about that surely God's goodness, his
Mm-hmm.
loving kindness will
Mm-hmm.
pursue me all the days of my life. And
Yeah.
I look back on my life, and there's definitely moments and times and seasons
Mm-hmm.
where I did not feel like God's goodness and loving kindness was pursuing me. But when I
Yeah.
look back and go, oh my gosh, absolutely every moment of every day, his loving kindness was pursuing
That's
me.
right.
Right.
That's right.
And I think there were times where I really thought, in order for me to have a relationship with God, I had to pursue him. I had to work at that relationship and all this.
Mm-hmm.
It's true, like the more time I spend in scripture, the more connected I feel. The more time that I have in prayer, and some of those times are in quiet for a significant portion of time, and sometimes those are in the 3 minute drive that I have between meetings. All of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I can see God's goodness and His loving kindness pursuing me.
Yeah.
But as an example, that bike shop, I like we talked about, I was not great at regular sports.
Mm-hmm.
I was not great at a lot of the activities that, other kids seem to be good at, but I was an intense kid and I had extreme interests. Those, few things I was interested in, I was very interested in them.
Right, right.
And I realized, that bike shop was really one of the first times where I started to understand that it was a doorway to a dream journey.
Mm.
And I really thought, getting the job at the bike shop was the dream. But just like any
Yeah.
any dream pursuit,
Yeah.
there is a beginning, but there's
Yeah.
also a journey, and there's also what I would call a back door to every
Yeah.
dream. And what I mean by that is I thought the dream was just to get the job. And
Right.
I did get that job at 13, which probably violated some laws and some, codes and all those things. But oh my gosh. And then when I did, I was at that shop as often and as much as I could, whether I was getting paid or not. Like I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
And I then my love for bicycles led me to the bike shop. Once I was in that door, once I had that job, then I started to fall in love with selling, which is
Right.
just a form of communication, right? Like we're
Absolutely.
all selling
Mm-hmm.
all the time, right?
Yeah.
And you can either have a negative association with that or a positive association with that, but it's just a form of communication, building relationships, all those things. And so, yeah, at a young age, I started reading books about selling, which did not necessarily make me popular at school, but it did make me a lot of money and I really enjoyed it.
Right.
And so then at a young age, I wound up kind of managing the sales team of this bike shop, which we wound up, growing to a couple of locations. And,
Mm-hmm.
I started to order things. And so then the dream journey, not just falling in love with sales, but I actually started to fall in love with the idea of entrepreneurship. And I got,
Right.
I was in charge of certain product lines and Oakley sunglasses as an example, which really started to kind of blossom at that time. And so I, got to put together orders and,
Mm-hmm.
Marty would give me a budget and I would just try to maximize that, and then was bonused accordingly. And
Yeah.
so it truly, what's amazing about that as an example of a dream journey is oftentimes people will say, well, I think my dream is this, or I think I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to do this. And that's the beginning of something.
That's
And
right.
then, again, God in his goodness, I didn't realize it, but God was walking alongside me,
Mm-hmm.
guiding me, protecting me, stretching me, all of those things. And it really did plant seeds that
Mm-hmm.
years later, now they're still growing in me and through me. And I still like teach some of the strategies that I learned at 13, 14, and 15. So
That's
I'm just
right.
so
And
grateful for that season.
God does not miss a detail and he uses everything. And when we look back purposefully, we can see, and it sounds like a lot of what you help people through in your coaching is that we can see how one step leads to another. And some things have to be learned before you can move to the next step.
Yep.
And sometimes we'll get the same lesson in different forms over and over again until we finally realize what we're supposed to
Exactly.
learn. And a lot of times
Yep.
people say, "Why are you doing this to me, God?" And I've learned to ask, "What do you want me to learn in the
Yep.
situation?"
Yep.
And another thing that I made a little note about when you were talking about like, how things are difficult, but then how you learn from thing to thing to thing is I often say that God is a gardener. It does not
Mm,
feel good when we're pruned. It doesn't feel
right.
good, I'm pretty sure, to a plant to be dug up when it already is fully rooted, to be transplanted. But sometimes God's putting you in a new place so that you can have even deeper roots and grow even better fruit. It doesn't feel good, probably didn't feel good when you sat, alone during that time and you were kind of hidden away. But God does things during those times. He
Yeah.
fed Elijah when he hid him away. He fed
Right.
him and he gave it, and he spent time with him and he really leaned in. And one of the things about that story is people always talk about he was depressed and he ran away. No, actually, when you read it, God said, "Go here, turn eastward and hide." God put him there. And in the Kerith Ravine, it wasn't a babbling brook.
Right.
It was a little ravine. And so he had just prayed that God would shut up the heavens, right? So
Yep.
whatever water was in there, that's all there was. So there was a clock on it. It was a
Yep.
season. It wasn't
Yep.
forever. And when he left that place, having eaten and been kept by God's presence and been given water to drink, when he had what he needed to move forward, he then went on to do completely different ministry. So God is with us in all of these steps, and the things, if you just look at them as an insular singular item, it's hard, but it's really like God's creating a recipe or an equation, and it's just one step along the way.
Yeah. And he's using the shiznits out of,
Yeah.
things like I will say,
Shiznits.
I really want to clarify, at least
Uh-huh.
in my understanding of God's
Yeah.
heart. I don't think he gave me a milk allergy, so therefore I would sit by myself in that
No.
cafeteria, right? Like I'm not in that camp. I know some people like, well, God must have given you cancer, so you draw close to him.
Nope.
I don't believe that at all. I don't think
God
you do either.
uses things. He
Exactly. He
doesn't.
works
Yeah.
through things and then
That's
he
right.
redeems the shiznits out of them.
That's
And I
right.
will say, you fast forward just a little bit, and I think we talked about this before as well when we talked, but um, fast forward a few years in high school,
Mm-hmm.
I had this weird, and again, reinforcing, had this kind of weird outlook on life,
Mm-hmm.
an extreme, but I loved history, specifically
Mm-hmm.
American history. And I still do. I love the United States. I live in the United States. I know it's a wildly imperfect,
Mm-hmm.
messy experiment, but I love the United States. And in high school, I had this weird thought as we were talking about the American Revolution. I had this
Mm-hmm.
weird thought, especially for a high schooler. The thought was, I wonder how they teach this in England.
Hmm.
And then it sparked a whole thing where I was like, maybe I could go and study American history in England. That would be interesting. And then I figured out there was an exchange program, and my
Uh-huh.
parents, who were supportive of my weird extreme ideas, were like, yeah, you could go do that. And basically, my first year in college,
Mm-hmm.
I did that in a college in England. And one of the classes I took was American history. Now, it's hilarious because in God's sense of humor and goodness, I wound up taking an American history class in England from an anti-American socialist. So that wound up being really interesting. But I will say, and boy, lots of revelation and cool stories out of that as well. But I will say that one of the ways that he redeemed me sitting by myself in cafeterias from time to time and
Mm-hmm.
navigating isolation is by
Mm-hmm.
the time I was a high school senior, I was like, yeah, I'll go to England by myself. Like,
Yeah.
I don't I don't think that God caused isolation in me, like situations where I would feel isolated just to, whatever. But I do believe that he redeemed my ability where I
That's right.
realized I'm okay by myself. right?
That's right. God
Use
strengthens
that
us
to,
sometimes with
yeah,
things that hurt. Like even when you go to the gym, when you build your muscle, you're actually creating a whole bunch of little tears. And when they heal, they're
they're
stronger and can
stronger.
carry more weight,
Exactly. And so
and
that's,
yeah,
I mean, most of my friends looked at me like, you're doing what?
yeah,
Where? And, I just turned 18 and I got on a plane. I'd never been, anywhere outside the United States. My parents had never been anywhere
yeah.
outside the United States. And, my first time on an international flight, I got on that flight to say, I'm going to live where I'm going for a year. I look back and say, okay, I can see, Jesus had his arm around me
Mm-hmm.
and, his heart could hurt because my heart was hurting in those
Yeah,
isolating situations. But I could also know he was smiling because
yeah.
there was a part of his heart that was saying, kiddo, I am going to
Mm-hmm.
redeem this and
Yeah,
I've got adventures for you to take. So just hang in there. And
yeah,
that's what I really try to encourage people with is that,
yeah.
God never leaves you. His goodness, his loving kindness is pursuing you.
That's
And
right.
he can both, like it says, Jesus wept when
Mm.
his friends, he knew he was going to pull Lazarus out of that
Mm-hmm.
tomb. Like he was
Mm-hmm.
minutes away from
Yep.
pulling off one of the biggest, amazing shows ever,
Mm-hmm.
right? But he still wept with his friends because their hearts hurt. And I do believe,
Right.
like, even going back to that moment, I do believe that, like, Jesus could have his arm around me and
Mm-hmm.
that he maybe even had a tear in his eye knowing, hey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, kiddo, that your heart is hurting. But he could
Yeah.
also be smiling because he would know that,
Mm-hmm.
2 years later, 3 years, well, in that case, it was, 5 to 10 years later, um, like, oh, kiddo, the
Mm-hmm.
places I'm going to show you because you've gone through this,
Yeah, and
and I
I
love
think
that.
they're the most beautiful parts of our story actually, and it kind of goes along with what we were saying about like the muscle tearing and then healing.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if you know what a kintsugi bowl is. Do you know what that is?
Is that the gold?
Golden
Tell me.
joinery. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what I actually used on the cover of my newest book, just because it's God's specialty, right? So he'll take, like, if you drop a cup in your kitchen, right, you scour the floor so nobody gets hurt. You find every little piece, you gather them all together, and then you go over and you throw them in the trash can. But that's not
Yeah.
what God does. He scours to find every little broken, sharp piece, everything that he did not intend to happen to you, but we live in a fallen world,
Yep.
and everything and he gathers them all together and he doesn't just put it back together. He puts it back together with gold. And so the
Yep.
places that were sharp, the places that were broken, the places you don't even really necessarily want to look at anymore, they are stronger, more valuable, and more beautiful. And then you are fully different. Yet you're still now able to carry his presence and to be poured into and to pour out into others. And so when people look at something that has golden joinery, they say, look how beautiful that is. And they're pointing at the places where you're put back together.
Yeah. I love that. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
And like I said, I think it's really his specialty. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
the things
He's
that
real good at what he does,
he
right? Amanda,
is, he
he is
is.
pretty doggone good at what he
He
does.
is, but he has this genuine heart. I love that you brought up about him crying because it wasn't, he did know what was going to happen, but his heart hurt for the people he loved. And
Yeah.
if we could take just a moment to take that in and realize that when you're sad, he is right there with you. When you're
Yeah.
hurting or devastated, so is he.
Yep.
Now we're gonna have to move on because you and I could
I
probably talk
know.
for a few hours, but I know
Exactly. I love it.
I want to hear a little bit about tell us about your wife, tell us about
Yeah.
your children, tell us a little bit about
Ah,
that.
yes, absolutely. So as we've talked about this, I'm married up. Like my selling skills helped.
Right.
So my wife is absolutely amazing. Her name is Melissa.
Hmm.
She is incredible. She runs a couple of ministries at our church. One
Hmm.
of which is Alpha. Which is an international program. I think it's one of the biggest moves of God. And it's a program at our church. It's actually, she wouldn't tell you this, but it's one of the biggest alpha programs in the United States and probably
Wait,
in the
was that
world.
the one with the you meet and you have dinner and then
Yeah, yeah, it's
yeah, I
basically
did that
about
one
10
time. Yeah.
weeks. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's powerful.
Yeah, it is.
It started in London, interestingly enough,
Yes,
and
yes.
has now gone all over the world. And
Hmm.
our she leads a program where we do it 3 times a year, and have hundreds of people
Yeah.
go through it each time.
Yeah.
And it was life changing for me.
It
Ironically,
is. It's
I mean,
powerful.
it is powerful because it uses Socratic method. It uses
Yes.
community, so you're in a small
Yep.
group. And
Uh-huh.
ironically, I joke about this all the time. But when we first started going to this church 20 plus years ago, they were
Hmm.
talking about Alpha, and my wife was like, "Hey, I think we should do that." And I
Uh-huh.
was like, "Hey, I'll do it as long as there's none of that stupid small group stuff." And she's like, I don't think so. Like, let's
That's
just try it. Right? It's
literally
a
what it's
10-week
based on.
program, and we
Yeah.
get there and they're like, okay, next week you get your small groups. And I look at my
Uh-huh.
wife like, come on.
Hmm.
But it changed our
Yeah.
lives. And now she runs it, which is incredible. And then she
Hmm.
also runs our prayer ministry,
Hmm.
which is a really significant ministry at our church as well. And so it's
Hmm.
absolutely amazing. We have two young men as our sons who are
Hmm.
absolute gifts of God. And I say that because the reason they exist is because God pulled off miracles. My wife had been diagnosed with cancer, and
Mm.
we had what we call now a six miracle day,
Wow.
where God pulled off a series of miracles all within a 24-hour period that made it possible for us to have our boys, which is absolutely amazing. And now one of them is currently serving in the Middle East. He's a part of the National Guard that's
Hmm.
deployed in the Middle East. And then our younger son is in LA as a working actor.
Wow. That's amazing. What would you say if you could only use a couple words to answer this, attracted you originally to your wife? What characteristics about her really said, okay, I really need to know her?
Yeah, I love it. Well, one, she's hot. I'll just be honest, right? Like absolutely beautiful to the core.
Hmm.
But she's also fierce.
Hmm.
And I know as a 20 someone, I would
Hmm.
not have been able to understand that. But
Yeah.
she's fierce.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that in God's perfect timing, because I went
Hmm.
to England, we actually graduated from high school in the same year and then wound up having the same degree at the
Hmm.
university where we met. But because I went to England for a year, even though we
Hmm.
graduated from high school at the same time, I wound up getting into the program a year after her. So we never had any of those classes together, which is
Hmm.
really interesting. So we were in the same school within that university all the time, but never had a class together. But the school that we went to, the university we went to, was the University of Northern Iowa. And while we were there, they started a pilot program, which was a leadership studies program. And
Hmm.
we wound up both being in there. And what was really interesting is we had a semester of leadership classes together where I got to sit in awe and be in
Hmm.
the same class and talk about leadership and all of those things. And I really was very impressed by her. To be perfectly honest, we were both dating other people at the time. And it's
Hmm.
probably good because I thought she was completely out of my league, which she was.
Hmm.
But I just really got to be impressed with her as a
Hmm.
human.
Yeah.
And that was something I really liked dating, Amanda. Like
Hmm.
I was pretty good at it too. So, but I like it was the first time where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I just found myself
Hmm.
impressed and kind of in awe, not just of her beauty, but also her eloquence. And she was
Yeah.
fierce. Like
Yeah.
she had opinions. She was strong. She grew up a farm kid.
Yeah.
And I mean, she had two sisters. She was one of three daughters of the Johnson clan in a small little community up in Northwest Iowa. And the Johnson girls, man, they worked hard. They were known
Yeah.
for being able to throw a hay bale. And I mean, they were all and still are absolutely beautiful, but fierce.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with that. And then the second semester of that class, God provided an opportunity for both of us to be on a retreat, and we just got to know each other even better.
Mm.
And I came back from that retreat, and it's funny, I pulled my roommate aside and said, "Hey, I have to break up with the girl that I'm dating right now." And he's like, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I just met the caliber of woman that I want to marry. I don't
Mm.
think I'll get to marry her, but I
Yeah.
just met the caliber of woman that I want to marry and
Yeah.
to date anything less than that." And I didn't mean that the girl that I was dating was
No,
bad,
no, but
but it was
you
just
you
like
knew
anything
what
less than that.
attributes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
anything other than that, I just I should it would do me and anybody that I'm dating a disservice
Yeah.
to date anyone wasn't like that.
Yeah. I mean,
And
honestly,
I
that
broke
shows
up.
good character that
Yeah,
they,
well, I'm glad you said that. I
yeah.
probably didn't have, I wasn't batting 100% on all those things, but I did. And then what's absolutely beautiful in God's perfect timing, I didn't realize it, but Mel came back and broke up with the
Hmm.
guy she was dating, basically for the same reason. We hadn't talked
Yeah.
about it. Went
Yeah.
on a date that following weekend, and it was the last first date we ever had.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's amazing. And we have had an adventure since
Yeah.
then. It hasn't been
That's awesome.
easy. Lots of ups and downs, but really, other than my salvation and being in relationship with God, my relationship with my wife is the absolute best gift that God gave me. And
Hmm.
I can tell you, I wasn't smart enough. It was God's good grace.
It always is. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely that.
Yeah.
And I went and lived in England a second time,
Hmm.
and I wrote her every
Yeah.
day. I've never done that before, and I've
Uh-huh.
not done that since. But
Yeah.
I wrote her every day because you didn't have
Yeah.
phones or
Yeah.
messaging or email or
Hmm.
any of that, and I snail mailed her every day, and
Yeah.
all and came back, and basically the day I came back, I proposed, and we were married a
Hmm.
year later. So
Wow, that's amazing. I
yeah,
love how God puts people in our lives in just the right time.
yeah.
And now, again, we could probably just continue talking about this forever, but I do
Yeah.
want to get to what you're doing now. So, you have written books, you
Yep.
are a coach, you also have a podcast. Tell us a little bit about how did all of that happen? And we
Yeah.
can clearly tell from what we talked about so far how God kind of put those things in your life and how he's now using them. It's funny, I look back at the things that I do now, and I went to NYU for dramatic writing, and I had to take also acting and voice and film. And
Amazing.
now, like,
Look
oh,
at you.
well, I'm using them now. That's
Right.
really crazy,
Exactly. God's
But
working through you in such huge ways.
years later,
Yeah.
I completely wasn't Christian for so many years. So it's funny how he'll use what happens in your life. So he's given you all of these great lessons
Yep.
pulled out of you things that he definitely intentionally, placed in you as talents
Yeah.
and passions. So how did you get to writing, podcasting, coaching? Tell us.
Yeah. So what's amazing is, God plants seeds, he waters those seeds. And sometimes you think those seeds aren't growing, or sometimes
Yeah.
you think those things are growing, but they're popping up out of the soil in different ways than you thought. And
Mm-hmm.
interestingly enough, after college, I wound up going into business to business sales, and then I got into pharmaceutical sales, and really wound up having a lot of success with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in pharmaceutical sales, and then I got into pharmaceutical training. I helped to um, lead a $2 billion pharmaceutical company's training department, and had all
Mm-hmm.
these incredible experiences, and God had planted some seeds with those entrepreneurial experiences that I had had with the bike shop, and
Mm-hmm.
those hadn't grown for a long time. But then I got promoted into a bad fit job. It looked great on paper, but within
Yeah.
24 hours of being in this new job, I was like, oh no. And I can tell you, I was a little mad at God, to be perfectly honest. Like, wait
Mm-hmm.
a second, this is terrible. And I thought this was the right thing, and all these kinds of things. Um, but what I'm grateful for is that bad fit job woke up and reignited that
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurial dream.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that over that time, I joke about it now, but it's true. My wife was staying home with our two boys at the time, so we were living a sitcom life, which was
Mm-hmm.
single income, two children, oppressive mortgage. So I couldn't just
Yeah.
quit that bad fit job and go do my
Right.
dream job. I
Mm-hmm.
still had to do that job, and I want to deliver excellence no matter what I'm doing, right? Whether I love it or
Right.
not, I want to deliver excellence. So I committed to doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell you that it was such a bad fit that it was starting to kill my soul. And
Mm.
Melissa, my wife, could see that, and she was concerned too. And so,
Yeah.
because I couldn't just quit that job, I started to experiment with things on the side.
Mm-hmm.
And almost immediately, through Mel's help and through some mentors, I was able to find coaching. Like I
Mm.
actually realized, hey, I could be really good at this. And so
Yeah.
I went and got some training. I made every mistake known to man, all of those things, but started to build a coaching and speaking business on the side. And those
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurial seeds that God had planted at that bike shop in that
Yeah.
hole in the wall building started to grow. And
Yeah.
we started to pray, like, Lord, when it's time, maybe I can do this full time. And I started
Mm-hmm.
to really work that plan. I thought it was going to be 5 years before I was able to do that. But, a lot of hard work, some duct tape, and a lot of prayer. I was
Mm-hmm.
able to do that in 5 months and be able to
Wow.
replace that income. And we haven't looked back, which has been absolutely beautiful. So I've been coaching and speaking since 2002. In
Mm-hmm.
2006, other coaches and speakers really started to see what I was doing seemed to be working. And so I started to then teach other coaches and speakers
Mm-hmm.
around that time, which is amazing. And then we took that training online in 2011. And now we've been able to help thousands of coaches and speakers around the country and around the world, which is
Awesome.
amazing. And then I realized I started our Dream Think Do podcast back in 2016
Mm-hmm.
because I realized, kind of like you, I wanted to impact people and help people. And some of the services that I provide, is a pretty big investment. So I wanted to be able to do something where I could really explore the things I'm passionate about and be able to help a bunch of people, but be able to have something I could offer for free,
Right.
and all of that. And so Dream Think Do started then, which is amazing. And I'll be recording episode 445, I think, today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's just been amazing, and it's been an opportunity to really have, like, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think everybody should have a podcast because it gives you this great excuse to have
Yeah.
these amazing conversations.
Yeah.
But I said, so
It.
I've been able to have amazing, incredible,
Mm-hmm.
discussions with
Mm-hmm.
fascinating people.
Yeah.
And some of those conversations are solely about business or strategy or whatever, but oftentimes we wind up getting to talk about faith. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
necessarily a faith-based podcast, but I talk about my faith all the time because that's who I am. And
Yeah.
so it's just been a great opportunity, and it's really blessed our business. And I am grateful for that bad fit job. Looking back on it, because
Yep.
that's a part of the work that we do now, is I want people doing what they were put on the planet to do. And so I
Absolutely.
work
Yeah.
with highly successful people to help them figure out what that is and to do that with excellence. And I do that through my
Mm-hmm.
coaching and my speaking. And that's a big part of what Dream Think Do is. I got a couple of books on that topic as well. So yeah, it's just been a true honor, and it's
Mm-hmm.
God's grace that's
Yeah.
allowed me to have a bunch of experiments. Some of them went horribly wrong and got very messy, but by and large, the big picture is I'm getting to do more and more of what God put me on the planet to do, and
Yeah.
now I get to help other people do that too.
Yeah. There's nothing like stepping into not only the calling, but the timing of God.
Right.
And I think that's awesome. Now, we will, after I ask you this last question, we'll talk about, we talked about doing a giveaway of your
Yeah.
books. So here's the final question, though. I always end every episode with this question. Not
Yeah.
that we can go back, but the person listening can apply the wisdom of your answer perhaps to their life today. So if you could go back and give your younger self any advice, what would that be?
Oh boy. Well, it's interesting, because I would probably lean on some of the wisdom that the bike shop owner, Marty Doan, gave me early on. And I
Mm-hmm.
would just say lean on that wisdom even more. And his advice to me, because I was a kid that was worried a lot, sometimes socially awkward, all of those things. And one time he gave me the advice. He's like, especially, with the bike shop and selling and all of those things, I was worried whether people would accept me. I was worried whether people would see me as somebody that was cool or a good source of information and all of that. And he
Mm-hmm.
stopped me once and he said, Mitch, stop focusing on being interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Focus on being interested.
Mm, I like it. That's
It,
good information
it
right
was
there.
great
Yeah.
advice that I still
Yeah.
lean on every
Yeah.
day. Because he said, he followed that up pretty quickly by saying, hey, by the way, if
Mm-hmm.
you're interested, if
You're
you're
interesting. Yeah.
authentically
Mm-hmm.
curious about people, you will become the most interesting person in any room.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. Perspective really is everything. And The dialogue that goes on in our minds really is not the way other people see us. It's not the way that God sees us. And sometimes it's just a result of things that we've told ourselves, and we
Yep.
could tell ourselves something else.
It's so true.
you know so let me just say, so we did talk about the week that your episode comes out, we're going to do a
Yes.
giveaway,
I
right?
love that.
Yeah, and that'll be on Instagram for those of you that follow us there. It's always so fun, and you're definitely going to want to take a look in the show notes and follow along with what Mitch is doing everywhere. I'll have all the links there. And
Thank you.
Mitch, I just want to thank you for taking the time to share your story, and I'm really excited to be able to share it with others.
I am so honored to be a part of what you're doing and to be on the journey with you, Amanda. I'm just so grateful for you. And these kinds of conversations are what needs to happen because God's doing amazing things all over the place. But
Yeah,
sometimes, these stories matter. And so it's
they
just
do.
such an honor to be a part of the amazing, so much of the amazing work that you're doing. So thank you
Oh,
so much.
thank you. Well, I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. You know, if you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.